Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of DigiChem Dialogue series. We are here with a esteemed guest from BASF, but before I introduce him, I would like to give a little bit of background on what is the DigiChem Dialogue series and why we are doing it. So first of all, introducing Agilis, just a quick 1-minute intro. We are a leading provider of digital customer engagement solutions for the chemical industry. 7 years in business, we work with many global producers and distributors. And in fact, it is through these customer engagements where the idea for DigiChem Dialogues was born. We were requested by many industry leaders that the digital engagement is something new for the industry. And this is where we are transitioning from software being only an IT solution to a business solution where the business leaders are more likely to get involved because this is a customer engagement solution. So there is a different level of understanding of how these solutions should be configured, where to start, how to implement digital journey. IT speaks a different language, the business understands it differently. So the idea that was, came from a lot of discussion was that we've been the industry has been on the digital journey for the past 5-6 years. It is now time to maybe bring together the folks who have already been there, done that, at least the first or second phase of digitalization. So our goal with this series is to bring the industry leaders who have led their organizations in implementing digital channels for customer engagements and learn from their experience for the others who are considering. So this webinar series is not about promoting Agilis in any way. It is squarely focused on bringing the best practices and bringing the like-minded people to understand what digitalization is, what are the challenges, and how we all can learn from each other to do it better, do it more effectively, and offer an awesome customer experience. So with that, I welcome Marius Vaarkamp. Marius is the business director for fuel and lubricants business at BASF. I will let him introduce, but Marius has been at the forefront of digitalization, not just at BASF, but I would say in chemical industry, because he started digitalization for his business much before most of the folks in the industry did. So being a front runner, he has learned quite a few things. So today he will share his experiences on what was his thought process, why he decided to launch a digital channel for his business, and what did he learn from those over the last 5 years. So Marius, welcome to the DigiChem series. Thank you for your time, and maybe let's start with the introduction. If you could briefly describe your journey in the chemical world and be with BASF, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Thanks for inviting me. Very happy to talk about what we've done in this space. About myself, I was originally educated as a chemist and a chemical engineer. I did a PhD in chemical engineering, really focused on partly on actually catalysis, but partly I would say on data analysis, so data science. And I developed some simulation software, which then was the basis for me actually starting a software company, or actually a more general company, but really the main focus of that company was to actually do software. That software is actually still in existence. If you want it, you can still contact me, but that's a different conversation. But I have had that look at like, okay, how do we take data, how do we take information, and how do we then make that easier to process, how to make this more accessible as part of pretty much everywhere where I've been. I did spend some time in, obviously in chemistry, R&D, spent a lot of time in sales, but also there, I spent another example of, I think, where data processing is very important is if you go into areas where you collect data at high frequency and there are many data points. So where you create like gigabytes of data, so say in a day. How do you visualize that? How do you process it? And for me, that is part which really is somewhat integral, very similar to what you do in how do you serve your customers with information. Yeah. And so this is where this transition comes from. Okay, I have a bunch of data. How do I get it to the individual scientist that then does that? That's like what we call data science. But if we talk about like how do we think about like what do our customers want to see about data? How do we make it easy for them to actually interact with us? How do we make it easy for them to actually find all the documents, etc. And so that really, has been an integral part of everything what I think about. And now since I've become a business leader, I think this really is something that drives part of my passion in terms of like how do we improve the customer experience. And part of that is of course like how do customers find us, and then once they found us, how do we serve them better? How do we make it easier for them to do business with us? So that's kind of my background. From like where does the passion come from a content perspective. I spent a lot of time in the catalyst division of BASF, and about 9 years ago I moved to performance chemicals, where I now really run a P&L for part of the fuel and lubricant solutions chemicals.
Right. Thank you, Marius. So as I recall, you were the first business leader at BASF to proactively adopt a digital channel for your business 5 years back. You launched an open portal just before the pandemic, and it was an outstanding success. So tell us about your thought process. Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure it was the first one. I do think that the integrated approach that was taken, I think, was unique. I think there were some other e-commerce places where people were dabbling with Alibaba or putting some stuff on eBay. I think what made this unique is really that we were looking at it from what is the customer journey completely. And as I said earlier, how do they find us? Yeah. And how do we then actually get them into the sales funnel? And how does this then translate into actual business? And that was really the thought process in terms of, okay, we could transact. At that point, we did already have a portal where you wasn't a little bit concrete, I will admit, but where we could basically put orders in and then provide some conversations back. Of course, like every big chemical company, we had a Lemmica interface for dealing with particular OEM business. But really the key question for me for this part of the portfolio was where it was a very broad set of applications where we were wondering like, okay, are there more customers out there for our products that we currently do not see? And so we actually worked on getting a new website up and running with some additional content. There was a great way to actually then say we of course made a decision that we do not want to share everything on the internet. So how do we then control access to this additional documentation and the ability to integrate that with something where people can request samples, can request quotes, and create and also ask for all kinds of documentation. That really was like why we basically said, okay, this is now the time to actually do this. The reason I pushed for it at that point was because I feel this is where part of the business is going. Yeah, we will never get away from personal interaction as being the basis for a lot of long, big and huge relationships. But making things easier, making it possible for people to find you, this is where part of the world is moving. Yeah, and I just need to think about like how easy is it to go and actually see customers. Try to get a customer meeting face to face on Friday. Yeah, good luck. This is not happening in most places. Yeah, and the same almost applies for Monday at this point. So there's lots of people on companies offer flexibility, and to actually spend that time and actually get that in place. This is very, very hard. And the ability to actually do these things virtually, to actually make it also 24/7 so people can look at it at their own time. But then you really need to get to the point that it is sufficient. You can answer almost all their questions instead of just a few, because if you then still need to go back and actually do some hand holding, then still doesn't speed up everything. So it really is a part of like you have to do it almost perfectly, and this is why it's so important to actually really think through what do you want to do, what part of your portfolio, what part of the customer base do you want to serve, etc., etc., etc. So the thought process really was like, okay, how do we get ready for the future? Yeah.
Right. Right. Yep. And future is now. So, and I think your timing was perfect because it was just nobody knew at that time how long the pandemic will last and how severe it would be. So, it was a perfect timing from both from customers' point of view as well as from your point of view.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it was also one of those things where we were able to actually do this virtually, and kudos to the Agilis team at that time to actually step up and actually make it happen. It must not have been easy, but I was very proud when we got that going.
Right, right. I think though, so we hear from a lot of the industry folks that one of the biggest challenge is where to start digital journey, because everyone intuitively thinks about digital means e-commerce, but it's not so. You are in a B2B industrial world. You need to offer customers digital. First of all, you have to think about digitalizing the entire customer journey. So, and then when you start thinking about all that, it becomes a pretty onerous, long process or a project. So it's a big undertaking. So, and then like you said, you have to do it right. So what is in your perspective, what is the first step that people, industry folks should be doing if they are just starting their digital journey?
It almost depends on where they start from. Yeah, if you have a digital order to delivery or order to cash system already in place, that's one thing. Yeah, so that I think nearly every company, really small companies, sometimes still run off spreadsheets. You'd be surprised in family businesses. But if you once you have somewhat of an ERP system, you can tag on the order to cash or the order to delivery pieces, and lots of people offer a front end, and that can tap into that to actually pretty quickly get into what people would call the e-commerce part of it. That's kind of like, I would almost say, plug and play. You'll pay some money, but this is fairly readily available. And I think that's also not necessarily so unique to the chemical industry, and that's why there's so many suppliers out there. But I think get a lot more interesting is in terms of like, okay, how do you find the customers, and how do you, what is your overall presence on the internet and information sharing, and how do you make sure customers get all their SDS information? How do they get all the technical information that they want? If there's any kind of regulatory support that they need, all these pieces, that is not standard. Yeah. And from my perspective, if you really want to have a good digital solution, lots of people would like to actually have that information at their fingertips, be able to go into a portal and then say, okay, for chemical ABC, I want the technical information, the chemical, the safety sheets, and not just for the US, but I also want them for Canada, and I want them in French, and for Mexico, I want them in Spanish, etc., etc. And that really brings you in terms of like, how do you have your internal documents truly organized? And so what my view is, yeah, so even if nearly every company has stored this somewhere, yeah, and for your salespeople, it's already very important that they actually have pretty quick access to this. Yeah, it will speed them up if they actually internally have some sort of a centralized database. Or a product information management system is there. So the PIM is what most people now is a popular acronym to use this, and that will. If you have that, you already can help your internal salespeople, your tech service people. You can help your customer care folks, your customer service folks, and to speak with one voice, to always have the latest information available, because there's also lots of topics around outdated documents and not sending the latest versions, etc., which could get you out of compliance, by the way. So that's one thing where I think just even before you do anything outside the company with a digital interface, it could just help yourself in terms of like making your own organization already better, get yourself organized. And then, yeah, if you want to have a good digital presence that is beyond what I would say a website and a contact form, you need to have this information available for your customers and your prospective customers. And without good digitalization around this PIM, you can't really do it. You can, of course, if you have 50 documents, of course you can do it by hand. Yeah. But once you start talking about 50 chemicals with 10 different languages, each of them has 3 associated technical documents and different certificates, and not just the SDS, but maybe also some food grade label, food grade document, food grade certificates, or you want to put your ISO certificates online, etc., etc. It becomes pretty daunting to actually get all of that pretty well organized. And obviously, depending on the size of the company, there are companies that offer solutions to help you. You can build it yourself, like some other companies do. But this, for me, is really, if you want to have a successful portal that is not going to eat up more resources than you actually save, and and actually help you also internally and your salespeople, that do the other day-to-day, not the non-digital interactions, you need to have a very good PIM. Yeah, that's really the starting point in my view. If you don't get yourself organized with these documents, you can have a process that you can digitize. And if you don't have a pretty well described process with well described documents, it's not a good look in terms of automation and those kinds of items. So I would definitely recommend that people start there.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So I think essentially what you described is that in the initial stage, a lot of companies, chemical suppliers, they thought you just extend out your ERP and then give customers an ability to place orders. But that is an order portal that is not digitizing the entire customer journey, because most ERPs, first of all, ERPs are clumsy just by nature, because more like accounting systems, accounting of materials or manpower or the cash. Those are not designed for customer interface. And then secondly, the most ERP-based solutions do not give a good visibility into your entire product portfolio. And so I think there is a distinction between the customer portal for order placement versus digitizing the entire customer journey. And a lot of the modern solutions, including ours, do not differentiate between the two. We almost always advise our prospects to start with digitizing the product data, launching digital catalogs, creating a customer engagement, and then leading to the placing the orders. So that way it serves both current as well as new customers.
Yeah, and this is also a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Yeah, you got to think about your customers. Yeah, right. Your customers also run an ERP. In every one of you that's talking about, okay, I want to digitize my customers' digital journey, you should go to your procurement organization and ask them, how do you want to place orders? Do you want to type this into somebody's portal? They will tell you that they don't like to do that. You know, they will if the company is on an ERP, it will either want to interface directly. So I already referenced Telemica as basically the standard, but there are other offerings. Mm-hmm. And then other thing people will use is like your ERP system will spit out a purchase order in a PDF file. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And there are all kinds of solutions where you can actually email this to a vendor, and the vendor can digitize this with some sort of OCR solution. This is getting better every day of the week. But then how do you do and then the confirmation, you can still automate. Yeah. Uh-huh. Or available to promise, or all of that. You can still move that into a digital portal, but you will not convince most of your customers to actually go into your portal and manually type in these orders. I don't see that happening, to be honest. For very small companies, they might do it, but for the larger they get, the more difficult this is going to be. However, they will all want the order tracking.
Right.
Yeah? They will all want to see the order confirmation. They will all want to see if they either send you emails, but if you can convince them that their service is getting better and more timely, if they go on the portal and actually check and they can see whether the truck dispatches and when it's arriving, etc., and they don't have to wait for the customer service or the account manager to actually get back to them in a couple of hours. And if you build the system correctly, the account manager and the customer service person will be pulling that same data from exactly the same interface that is interfacing with your external portal. And so then you can actually increase the service level for your customers. And that's what's going to be a game changer in my mind. Yeah, in terms of like, once they recognize, it's easier to actually get the information. It's more timely than when they actually call or email and then wait for the updated response. So and this, of course, if everything's running smoothly and there's days of slack into delivery patterns, this is not that important. But if people run short or there are shortages in the market, this becomes a competitive advantage. Yeah. Right. So it will be no value, hopes for huge value. And then it will go down again.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a key point that, your digital channel, in today's agent time, the thing with the ERP or CRM solutions, those are internal. You can mandate employees to go through training. But when it comes to digital customer engagement, you cannot mandate your customers to go through training or use the solution the way you want. So the key is to replicate their current processes and still offer value through the digital channels.
Yeah, I think you do need to ask yourself, can you simplify the process? Yeah. Are there steps that you don't need, etc., because we sometimes we do tend to get things a little more restrictive, too many people involved, etc., where you get like meetings just where the decision is always the same. So I think it's a good opportunity to maybe simplify some of your business processes, which shouldn't be the focus. Yeah, but I think I've seen situations where it also resulted in significant simplification, which is really a nice side benefit. Yeah.
Right. So moving on, once you decided to launch the digital channel, what were the internal preparations? What steps did you take and how did you resource the project? Because this is one of the other challenges that we hear from the industry folks, that how do you find resources? And no one knows better than working in a large organization like BSF with multiple priorities, multiple projects. So how did you get around that challenge?
So this is hard, yeah. And so you got to think really about what do you want to do yourself, and what do you want to outsource. So that's one part. But even more important is you got to have a pretty clear vision about what the scope is. It's very easy to have scope creep in these kinds of bits, and really get clear about what's nice to have and what is absolutely minimal requirement. Yeah. So when we did the Oppenal portal as an example, I actually brought together a team of the sales folks, the technical service, and the MBD person, and the product manager and the customer care person. And so we basically had the whole journey more or less represented in the group. And we spent about a half a day mapping everything out in terms of like, okay, this is how this would look like, this is what we want. Really, it was kind of like a process. And we had a facilitator from Agilis at that time that actually asked us all the questions, but I think we also had we had already prepared a little bit about, okay, what do we want to make digital and what do we not want to make digital in this step? Yeah. And so once you have that very clear, you then basically can just mock stuff up in terms of I want this, I want this to look like this, what information do I want in the product information, in the PIN, what do I want to show the customers, what do I want to show them before they register, what do I want to show them after they register, this is pretty important, how do I want them to request a sample, make some things around like, okay, what samples are free, what samples are not free, Can they request multiple samples? All these kinds of items that gets a little bit into the details, but it's fairly straightforward if you think about, okay, how do you go through the sales process? And then just don't be afraid to make a decision. Yeah, it's not about doing it perfectly at that stage. At that stage is basically like, okay, we're going to do it this way. You're not designing a new, but I had to do some arguing with people. We're not making a new chemical. We're not blowing up a plant. Or it's okay to make a mistake. Yeah, because we can fix it pretty quickly. Yeah, get out of this mindset of like innovation in the chemical industry is safety is huge. Yeah, but to just get out of that mindset in terms of like, no, we're going to do it this way first, and then if we need to adjust, then that's fine. But you will learn once you get it up and running in terms of like where the bottlenecks are. But really get a good scope around what customers you want to serve, what markets you want to serve, so that will allow you to actually build a front end to pull people in, and then the clarity on the back end around like, okay, what is free, what is not free, what information should go before the registration, what information becomes available once people have registered. And then the other part, of course, then is, and we didn't think about this, but this is, it's like, how do you can build this out later with digital marketing and email campaigns and all that kind of stuff. But that's not what we decided to basically, that's not scope, that was not part of scope one. Yeah. We basically wanted to just do the journey and then not include digital marketing and all these kinds of things. We took all of that out. Now, some people might want to put it in, but it will make the scope bigger, obviously. Yeah. So you think about like what's in, what's out.
Right. Yeah. I think that is very important because you need to have a clarity around the scope. So there is so much to do, and the Rome wasn't built overnight. So you need to do it one step at a time. Crawl, walk, run. Right.
Yeah.
So what was your thought process around which customers to onboard first? Like what path you chose and why? Because that is another question that we get asked. Like, okay, how do you decide which customers to prioritize?
Yeah. So we chose to focus on our smaller customers because we wanted to increase their service level, and it's pretty hard for them to get our attention. Yeah. And some of them actually told us like, we are afraid to actually even do business with large companies because they will not give us the time of day, and they will treat us badly, they will cut us off, they will change things like unilaterally, etc. And I think these smaller customers are also customers. They also want to be served, and they can be very good for your business because they actually do represent a good piece of your revenue, and in a lot of cases they're willing to pay a little premium to actually get a decent service. But then on the other hand, of course, from a business perspective, you do need to think about economies of scale. How many resources do you have? Do they come and go? Do they order on a regular basis? And so we decided to focus on our smaller customers, so the tail customers, and it's worked really nicely. Yeah, we had like 1 out of 60 or so that we initially transferred. Got some real pushback, and then later, after they actually really used it, they just started using it too. So it was really not a big deal. And a part of that is to increase their service level. Yeah, if they can get their information within minutes instead of having to wait 2 days before somebody comes back to them, they will pretty quickly change their behavior.
And did you see any change in behavior after you?
I think so. I haven't, from what I'm hearing, I haven't talked with the customers myself, but what I'm hearing is that we have less effort with these customers. It's really like now, of course, you need to maintain the system, etc. Once up and running, it's kind of like seamless. Right. And orders will come in, we'll serve them, and even documentation and order tracking when it's things coming. It's like we're really having good effort, traction with this digital piece.
Right, right. So the one other question that comes up more frequently is the internal challenges, the functional tension, because many a times the sales and customer service might see it as a threat. And then, so how did you overcome those internal challenges, and how did you bring together all the functions on this initiative?
So I think it goes a little bit back to this PIM, system. It's like my business definitely wants to grow. This is where we want to put our efforts in. And so how do we find these customers? How do we get the information in front of them? How do we spend the effort on these items? And how do we also develop our people? In terms of like working with these newer systems, etc. So there was some thoughts about like, okay, is this the right way? Do we have alternative solutions, etc.? But really, I think it's when you make the case to everybody about like, okay, this is going to help you doing your job better and giving every single customer better customer service, and to help you grow your territory, and really try to demonstrate how that works. And then once you, of course, get some traction, things really are much better. It's not really a big deal, but you got to come up with this clear vision in terms of like, okay, how is this going to fit in the ecosystem of our customer our customer relationship management? Yeah, not about like, okay, how do we even if you think about like a large OEM, other parts of BASF, we do millions of dollars of business with single customers, and all the orders come in via an EDI platform. You still have a dedicated account manager for these folks. So really, it's not about like, and I think this is the part where we need to be clear. It's like we want the repetitive piece, the piece which is where there's really little value add for having it come to a person and then have it shoved to the rest of the organization. You can simplify that and make that quicker. That's much better for everybody. I don't think a lot of people, maybe that's me, but not too many people enjoy just being a window person between two organizations.
Right. Right. I think from what we see, also industry is transitioning from being skeptics to more participation, especially from sales, because once you remove that perception of threat and also address some of the internal KPIs in a way that you remove the conflict. For example, just because a customer comes through digital channel does not impact a salesperson's commissions or any variable. So once you address that, I think the sales people we have seen are more enthusiastic, because who doesn't want to find new customers? Who doesn't want happy customers?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's also interesting is, so of course we built a portal first, etc., and then we did this, but now we've also integrated it back into our CRM system. And so there we actually have an integrated solution where we can actually see how the overall landscape of opportunities is really developing. And also when things come in through the customer portal, and in terms of requests, all of that now is getting logged in one central system. And so even people that are where we basically are now aggregating everything. This of course is then the next step, and this goes back to your earlier question, where do you start? But in the end, you can of course integrate this all into your CRM and then use it also for more data analytics, etc. The big part is really about like, okay, how do you find these new opportunities? How do you grow your business? How do you serve it efficiently with the resources that you have?
Right. Yeah. Just a time check. We have time for a couple of more questions. So what was your experience in adoption, both internal and external, after you launch? And what are some of the tactics your team used to get more adoption, both from customers as well as internally?
I think adoption has been good. both internal and external. What I did find a little difficult is like once you have, let's say, a lighthouse project,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you then scale this? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you then get this out to the next level? And I think that was actually a pretty difficult step to actually then get to the next level in terms of, okay, you take part of your business, how do you get the rest of your business then into a similar piece? Because and this comes back to me in terms of like, okay, how do you prepare? How do you get the infrastructure set up? Because it's one thing to actually have a success in a small part of your business and demonstrate that it's feasible, which really was what I wanted to do when we started off and all. But then, okay, how do you take the next step? And that's if you're in a really big organization like BSF, this is actually much harder than I anticipated. Also because of like other people have maybe other solutions or they've tried other things. If you're in an organization where, okay, this is the only solution that we have, it obviously makes it a little bit easier. So I think you got to think about that a little bit for also beforehand. Customers, no real issues. I think what is interested on the tail customers, so the smaller ones, they tend to basically only take action when they really need something. Yeah. So sometimes their order patterns are a little kind of like sporadic. Yeah, they're not really regular. They're not ordering every week or every month, etc. Thing you think is, and we were pretty worried at the start when we started the transitions in terms of like, well, nothing's happening. Are these guys really? Do they want to do this? Did the business go somewhere else? But then after a couple of months, once everybody got like, okay, another order of cycling, another cycle of ordering, it just turned out that everybody had converted. So it was really not that big of a deal. I would say that the quality of the platform obviously plays a role. Because we had some internal pushback around like, yeah, but our ordering system is not up to snuff, this, that, the other thing. So, but we didn't use the internal one. We actually used a customized platform that people could do an order, for which we built then an interface into our own platform that was older. And so then you get into this goes back again to next steps in terms of like, okay, how do you then upgrade everything to make that new experience standard? And so those are some of the harder parts in terms of how do you scale things, but it's not really necessarily a problem that everybody has. This is somewhat unique for the situation that my business was in.
Right. And then my final question is, is there anything you would have done differently starting your digital transformation journey?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this rather extensively. So on the one hand, I'm thinking like, well, I probably should have prepared better and brought more people on board ahead of time, and so that I could scale easier. On the other hand, that would have taken months, and I wouldn't have gotten going. Yeah.
Right.
So and in the end, the reason it got going quickly and we decided to just move convinced everybody that we should do something. And now we do have a solution that is scaled. But yeah, I wish I had been a little bit more aware in terms of like what kind of problems were coming down the road. But I think what I said earlier about like, okay, hey, at the end, this is digital. This is not launching a new chemical. So I'm pretty happy with the fact that we took the risk, actually decided to do things speedy, and then see where things go, while really trying to do the part that we did decide to do, to actually do those in a very high quality manner. So it's hindsight's 2020. Would the outcome have been different? Hard to tell. Whether we would have had what I would say would have been easier to scale, but because that scaling after the first success was pretty hard. But I think people, from my perspective, you got to think about that a little bit, and I think I would have done that maybe a little bit differently in terms of like to think about the scale. scaling. I would have should have started thinking about that earlier. Yeah, because we essentially waited about almost 2 years before we really said, okay, how do we scale now? I think this is something people, once you get it going, you should do probably a bit quicker. I think, stick with that.
Yep. I think, like you said, if you spend more time, probably would have never gotten off.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, of course. But that would not be a good outcome either. So
you took the lean startup approach. Lean startup approach: launch it and learn, rather than
launch and learn.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any final message to the audience? If people want to learn more, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so contact me on LinkedIn if you have any questions and want to have a one-on-one chat. Obviously, thanks to Agilis for helping me out in this journey and really supporting what we wanted to do. And then again, I think don't be afraid. This is an area where some experimentation is actually fairly straightforward. So just go for it.
Yeah. Marius, thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. So let me take that. The first one was, what was your criteria of success when quantifying the project results? What were the KPIs?
So one of the big, so we had the tail end of customers that we were driving through digital. Yeah. So one big part of it is like, okay, did we get the same level of revenue with these customers as we had before we did the transformation? Actually, we saw some pretty significant growth with these customers. You could argue how you quantify that, but it was definitely a multiple of GDP.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so that really helped, and of course, this was also during the pandemic, etc. So some people will argue about it, but I think we basically have been able to maintain that business. So I think it was a good move. So that was my main KPI. Yeah. The other part was I didn't really want to add a bunch of resources to actually maintain the technical the platform. Yeah.
Right.
Like one-time effort. Yeah, in terms of like get it all set up, but then it should be relatively minimal in being able to maintain it without adding resources. And so I think that was achieved as well. So there's another piece to think about. Yeah, if you had 3 or 4 people to maintain a technical resource, where's that coming from?
Good. We have another question. From your experience, what is the newest trend for our industry for information to be placed on customer portals?
Newest. I think there's always quite a large tension between what I would say marketplaces and I would say producer-owned customer portals. And so we see there's a little bit of FOMO in my mind around the marketplaces because they advertise heavily. My view here is that it's better to actually own that whole customer experience. Yeah, it's not necessarily to the producer's benefit to have their product right next to their competitor's product on a marketplace. And particularly if you're in a more specialized chemical and to differentiate yourself, I think you want to try to do that yourself. So I would say, and I think, so on the one hand, there's more people that are moving towards, okay, I want to make things more digital and make more items available. But on the other hand, I think there's more producers that are interested in actually having their own solution and having less dependence on a marketplace.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look, you speak to my core belief that we at Agilis firmly believe that this is the industry where even the buyers prefer to deal directly with the suppliers. They don't want a third party. So they want to buy either from a distributor or a producer, but they want to buy it directly from the source. And rightly so, because when you're dealing with hazardous regulated products, it is much more than just product availability and pricing. is reliability. You want to make sure that the right product gets delivered at the right time with the right documentation and the right infrastructure. So it's very, very critical. Marius, thank you very much for your time, and wish you all the best for all the future plans you have on your digital journey, as well as everything else in your business. And thank you, audience, for joining. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Marius or to me. Thank you.
Jay, thanks. Also delightful, good questions. So hope it was useful for the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you.